You know, for most of human history, the world was absolutely teeming with gods. From the sun in the sky to the waves in the sea, pretty much everything was governed by some kind of divine being. But then, something changed. A huge shift in thinking started to take place. So what were the philosophical arguments that began to challenge a worldview that had stood strong for thousands of years?
And we're not talking about a flash in the pan here. I mean, you can go all the way back to 3000 BCE in Mesopotamia, or look at ancient Egypt. Complex families of gods were completely central to their civilizations. They were the explanation for everything: why the Nile flooded, why the sun rose. It was just how the world worked.
So what happened? How did a way of seeing the world that guided humanity for millennia kind of get sidelined when it came to serious philosophical debates about ultimate reality? That's the mystery we're going to dig into.
To get a feel for this, let's just take ancient Greece. The gods there, they weren't these distant, untouchable forces. Oh no, they were full-blown characters. They got jealous, they got angry, they were deeply, deeply human.
I mean, just look at this timeline. The sheer scale is incredible, right? Polytheism was the default setting for centuries upon centuries. But then you see that last point. Around the 6th century BCE, right in the heart of polytheistic Greece, a totally new way of thinking starts to bubble up.
And this is where a handful of early Greek thinkers, the very first philosophers, started to look past the old myths. They began asking for rational, logical reasons for why the universe is the way it is. And boom, here it is. This is the first major crack in that old foundation. The philosopher Xenophanes pointed out something so simple, yet so revolutionary. Our gods look an awful lot like us. He said, hey, if a horse could draw a god, it would draw a divine horse. The implication was just radical. Maybe, just maybe, our gods are just reflections of ourselves.
Now, these thinkers didn't just poke holes in the old stories. They started building something new. Instead of a messy family of flawed gods, they started using pure reason to get to a single, ultimate source. The whole conversation shifted towards finding this one perfect, necessary foundation for all of reality.
Okay, so let's open up our case file and look at the first major philosophical argument. It really builds on what Xenophanes started, and it zeroes in on the huge logical problems you get when your gods act just like people.
So on one side, you have the gods from the myths. They're emotional, they change their minds, they even have origin stories. But from a philosophical standpoint, that's a real problem. See, for something to be the ultimate explanation for everything, it has to be perfect, unchanging, and the one thing in the universe that doesn't need a cause. It has to be, in a word, necessary.
Think about it for a second. If a god can get angry or jealous, that means something outside of that god is causing it to change. It's reacting to something. A being that can be changed by outside forces can't be the ultimate, self-sufficient cause of everything. It's just another piece of the puzzle, not the foundation the whole puzzle rests on.
Later thinkers like Thomas Aquinas came up with this brilliant analogy. He said to think of God like the sun. The sun is just always shining. It's always the same. If you go stand in the shade, you feel cold. If you step into the light, you feel warm. The sun didn't change from angry to happy, right? You changed your relationship to it. The change was in us, not in the perfect, unchanging being.
All right, the next argument kind of zooms out and looks at the universe itself. Everywhere we look, from the predictable orbits of the planets to the consistent laws of physics, we see this incredible unified order. And that made philosophers ask a really simple question: what's the best explanation for all this harmony? And to answer that, they pulled out this incredibly powerful logical tool called Occam's razor. The principle is just beautiful in its simplicity. Don't make things more complicated than they absolutely have to be. The simplest explanation that actually accounts for all the facts, that's probably the right one. So, let's just apply it right here. Our goal is to explain our ordered universe. So hypothesis A, there's one all-powerful first cause. Hypothesis B, there are a bunch of different, independent gods running the show. Well, if one single cause is enough to explain everything we see, then adding more gods into the mix doesn't actually explain anything new. It just makes the whole thing unnecessarily complicated. The conclusion you're left with is just really elegant. If the universe acts like one single coherent system, then logic points you toward a single coherent source. I mean, imagine a committee of bickering gods trying to run the cosmos. You'd expect chaos, right? Not the incredible harmony we actually see. And that brings us to our final and maybe the most powerful philosophical argument of them all. This one isn't about looking at the stars or making things simple. This is pure hard logic.
It argues that the very idea of an ultimate cause means there can only possibly be one. To get our heads around this, let's use a really simple analogy. Imagine a room that is pitch black, okay? Now you have one lamp, and this lamp is so powerful it can light up the entire room all by itself. That single lamp is absolutely necessary to see anything. So what happens if you bring a second lamp into the already fully lit room? Nothing, right? The room can't get any brighter. That second lamp is completely redundant. It is unnecessary. You simply cannot have two different things that are both necessary to do the exact same job. Now, philosophers take this exact same logic and apply it to this concept of a necessary being. This is the ultimate reality, the one thing that explains its own existence and everything else. It's the being that must exist for anything else to exist at all. It's that one lamp that's required to light up reality itself. And this, right here, is the philosophical knockout punch. If one necessary being is enough to explain all of existence, then a second one is, by definition, unnecessary. But a being that's unnecessary cannot be a necessary being. It's a flat-out logical contradiction. Therefore, there can only be one. Now, of course, people have pushed back on this. Some might say, well, what if multiple gods cooperate? But if they're all cooperating, they must be following some kind of higher principle or shared set of rules, which means that principle is the true ultimate cause, not the gods themselves. Others might argue that the many gods are just different faces of one supreme being. But that's not really polytheism, is it? That's basically monotheism wearing a different hat.
So, as we close our case file, what's the verdict? Well, from a purely philosophical standpoint, the idea of having multiple, independent, ultimate gods just kind of crumbled under the pressure of logical examination. And let's be super clear about this. This is not about saying one culture's stories are better than another's. This is a purely philosophical deep dive into logical coherence. And the conclusion these philosophers reached was that the idea of multiple ultimate causes is, at its core, self-contradictory. But this leaves us with a really fascinating final thought. If a worldview doesn't perfectly hold up under the microscope of strict philosophy, does that make it worthless? I mean, what other kinds of value, cultural, symbolic, maybe even personal, can these myths and stories of many gods still hold, even if they aren't the final explanation of reality? Now that is something to think about.